Hey guys, welcome to the Gecko Pod, episode number 22. We are a podcast for the gecko community where we talk about the hobby and business of breeding geckos. Our goal is to rally everybody together and to just have a good time and learn and grow and enjoy our projects together. My name is Harry with Zero's Geckos, AJ at AJD Reptiles co-hosting, and today we have good friend Michael at Chahoua Chamber, aka Chahoua Chamber, aka
Yep.
Charming Chewies, aka
Or Carmine
Chewie.
Chewies.
So,
Yeah.
Michael, how should we refer to the Chewies in this episode? Chahoua, Chahoua, what would you prefer?
I knew this was going to come up partially because we talked about it at the Atlanta show, AJ, and Gabby was like, "Oh, it's like a chamber." No,
That's
but
a
I
great
remember.
Gabby impression right there. That's pretty
Yeah.
good.
So I think the first time that I heard this was like Andrew Gilpin mentioned it a couple years ago, and then I talked to Brian about it maybe like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And when Brian explained it to me, it made a lot of sense. Like if you think about like chondros and some of the other species, like how the CH is hard, it's like, okay, it makes sense. Like I'm down. But my only thought on it is I don't know if it's like too late to try to change it now. Like I feel a little bit like the ship has sailed personally, but like if it becomes Chahoua, like I'm cool with whatever.
Then would you have to change your name?
No, I'm not changing it again.
Change it.
So tell us.
No, people who've known me for a while know that I've done this a couple times. So like, also I have the domains and the website. Like I'm not changing all that now.
So tell us about all the name changes.
Yeah,
and
let's
how you
start
came
at the
up with-
beginning.
Yeah.
What was the...
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah. So if we want to go all the way back, like in the
Let's do it.
90s, my brother and I, when you used to have to get like a faxed list of reptiles that were available from people that had them, we would cruise like kingsnake.com. This is back when like shipping a reptile across the country overnight was like $20. So because we live in Atlanta, like we were like, oh yeah, cool, let's just make like an Earthlink email address we call like ATL Herp. All right, cool. So we had like some bearded dragons. I had fat tails. My brother had leopard geckos. So that was for a while. Went to college, and then in college is where I started getting harder into geckos. So I am a marketing and advertising, like that's my major, that's where I work. So alliteration, I feel like always rings true and is easy for people to remember. So
Like
I think that's
rack.
yeah. So I think that's where Charming Chewies came from. And then I had that for a couple years, and there are some people who will still remember me as that. Like there are like people who see me at shows will still call me that sometimes. And I felt like for a while, I think you guys probably can relate to this, but for me, this started as a hobby and started as fun. And then I was like, oh, this is actually kind of a serious thing. And I felt like that name felt a little bit juvenile to me, honestly. Like I was like, do better than that. So I went down this road where I was trying to figure out really what I want to be, where it came from, where it made sense. And so where I came to was like when I was a kid, I loved dinosaurs. And I think that's why I love reptiles now. So when I like every Jurassic Park movie, I had every Jurassic Park toy, like if it was dinosaurs, I had it. So there was a little while where I changed my business name to Modern Dinosaur Geckos, I think. And then I was like, that's a mouthful. And like, nobody remembers that. And people were still calling me Charming Chewies anyway. And so then I think a couple years later with like SEO and search and social knowledge, which I do in my day job, I was like, I should have Chahoua in my name since that's primarily what I have. So went back the other direction, and that's where we came up with the Chahoua Chamber.
Nice.
And how long have you been Chahoua Chamber now? Because I feel like I remember Charming Chewies and I remember Chahoua Chamber, obviously, but I don't remember the dinosaur one in the middle.
Yeah, nobody does, so that's good.
MDG, modern.
Don't remember.
I'm trying to think. I think it was 2019.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, but I mean, you've been doing this obviously a long time. If you were working with your brother in the '90s, getting bearded dragons and stuff, I mean, could you just kind of give us a little bit of a background, maybe just a snapshot,
sure,
of kind of where you're from and what animals you had and stuff?
Yes. So I let's see. I grew up pretty much all over the place. Actually, growing up, my dad was in the car business, so I moved 20 times by the time I was 20. I moved 30 times by the time I was 30, actually. So we grew up a lot in Florida, which is like a great place to be if you like reptiles. So we moved back. We lived in New York and New Jersey. We lived in California outside of San Francisco. In Florida, growing up, we lived in Jacksonville, Coral Springs, Boca, Fort Lauderdale. Yeah, so we've lived like a couple different spots in Georgia as well. So moved around. When I was in second grade, I broke both of my arms. I fell off the monkey bars. And so my dad came home one day with a paper bag and opened it and was like, "Here, feel better." And it was two green iguanas.
Oh my god.
So I've pretty much actually had reptiles almost my whole life since I was in second grade. I had geckos in college, even when you weren't supposed to have anything like living. So over the time that I've been keeping reptiles, I've had some of the basics like fat tail geckos and leopard geckos. We've had, I'm trying to think, we've had amphibians like frogs, newts, tree frogs. We've had turtles at different points. I got my first snake in 2020. And
what did you get?
It's very exotic. I'm not sure if you've heard of them before. It's called a ball python.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I don't. Is that like a corn snake? Is it kind of like a corn snake?
Maybe a little.
Okay.
So I actually have been terrified of snakes for a lot of my life. And do you guys know Limey from Royal Reptilia?
Yeah, he lives about 10 miles from me.
Okay. So actually, this is a funny story. I knew Matt Parks years ago when he sold fat tail geckos. Do either of you remember this, or do you know?
I do, yeah.
So I remember like the old school Pangea website that was like black with red text. Remember that? And I bought a fat tail from Matt. So through Matt, I got introduced to Limey. So Limey's big into the ball python game. So I've known him, I don't know, 15 years probably. So as long as I've known Limey, he's always been like, you need to get a snake. I don't know. I was afraid of him. Like, honestly, I was afraid of snakes. And so in 2020, towards the end of the year, I was like, well, I've lived through a pandemic and everything else. Like, I should just overcome the other fear that I have, which is snakes.
Yeah.
So I talked to Limey and he was like, yeah, I'm going to send you one. So I got him and he's great. Actually, I love him. Like, he's probably he's the easiest crowd pleaser and the lowest maintenance of all the pets that I have.
Wow, that's cool. You only have one snake?
One, yeah.
You're going to get
more? Did he send you a fancy one or no?
Yeah, he's like a bamboo pastel ghost. I don't know. I honestly cannot keep up with ball python morphs, but he's like white and light brown and gray. So
that's cool.
Yeah, he's cool. And he's like,
cool.
he's never even hissed at me. He's never struck, nothing. So
do you hold it regularly? And
I don't know,
you feel comfortable?
I don't hold him that much, but yeah, like, I mean, when I first had him, I was like super cautious, like using the hook and everything. Yeah. And then as time has gone on, I mean, he's literally I will be bit by a Chahouas before I ever get bit by him. So yeah.
That's funny. I was scared of snakes too until my daughter, she had a corn snake about 3 years ago. And it's the chillest snake ever. And that's when I was like, oh, these are cool. You know, I wouldn't mind getting another snake.
Lowest maintenance, easiest pet. Like, I don't know what took me so long.
For like 2 weeks and it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. And then I'm trying to think. I got into crested geckos in like 2005. So I had a couple crested geckos.
Well, that's college. When AJ got into it, huh? 2000.
Yeah, same time. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I went to college in 2005 and you weren't supposed to have any pets. So it was hard to set something up that needed a heat lamp. So I was like this is perfect. I'll get one of these and I can feed it like, Rapashi or whatever it was at the time. So I had a couple of them. Fun fact, people laugh when I tell them this. In my whole life, I have hatched one crested gecko.
No.
That's impressive.
I have hatched one crested gecko. Yeah. So no, I don't know what it was, honestly. I think it was more like when I had them, I bought babies. And so I grew them up for like 3 years. And then, I mean, even like going through college and after college, like, I had like a small apartment. I didn't have a lot of space, so I didn't want a bunch of them. So yeah, like at one point I got eggs from a pair and incubated it, and I think one hatched, and that was the only crested gecko I've ever hatched. So
amazing.
Yeah.
And you didn't like it, so you gave up the
quick departure. He was like, nope.
I'm surprised Gabby didn't tell you this. I just got another crested gecko from her, or did she tell you that?
Did you buy it on the auction?
No, I bought it from Brett at the last Atlanta show.
Oh, okay.
So do you
What'd you get?
It's a lily white male, which like I know everyone's gonna like roast me for that, but I'm not out here trying to cash out on crested geckos. It just is like,
we love lily whites. No,
okay, great. Yeah, I'm in good company.
Yeah.
Do you know Nautilus Reptiles? Rachel is her name.
Yes.
Okay. So I've known Rachel for a very long time. She also lives in the Atlanta area. A couple months ago, she approached me and she's like, would you be interested? I have a really nice holdback crested gecko. Would you be interested in trading it for a Chahoua? And I was like, at that point in the season where I was sick of looking at Chahoua, and I was like, absolutely. So we did this trade, and she got like a nice Chahoua out of it, and I got this crested gecko, and it was the first time I'd had crested geckos.
Is it on your page?
Yeah.
Okay.
In probably like 10 years, maybe. I don't know, something like that. So I had her, and then I was joking, like Gabby put something on there and she was like, yeah, like you don't have any crested geckos, and then you go straight to like buying the nicest one or something like that. So we were going back and forth, and I was like, well, now I'm going to have to get a male, So, and it like we were going back and forth, and I was like, I've always really liked the lily whites a lot. Like just purely from like something to hold in your hand or to look at in an enclosure, I think they're really beautiful. So
they're incredible.
He's really nice. He came from Crimson Cresties, I think, originally.
Yeah, Donna. Yeah.
Donna, yeah.
So
good stuff.
Yeah, so he's really nice. So I have 2 crested geckos.
Nice.
That's cool.
So are you gonna breed them this year?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know if I'll like.
Ever breed them?
Yeah, I don't know if I ever will.
Is this one your snake?
Okay, so that is I forgot. I actually have 2 ball pythons.
Oh,
that's Alfredo. The other one is Rigatoni. The OG is Rigatoni. There's a guy who lives here in Atlanta who also breeds ball pythons, and he has purchased a bunch of Chahoua from me, and he's turned into a great friend. And so earlier this year, or last year now, he came over and he's like, I want you to have this. You need to have a second snake. And I was like, all right. So that's Alfredo, and then Rigatoni is the OG because he was the size of a Rigatoni when I got him.
I'll find him eventually.
Yeah. So anyway, I have 2 crested geckos. I got into a similar situation with Brian where I also have some Leachianis where
nice.
Yeah, so Brian wanted a male Chahoua that I have, I think. So that's what it was. Yeah. And
is that a CAMK?
Yes, it is.
Is that what that is? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have 2 of those from Brian.
Yeah, mine's beautiful.
Yeah. They're gorgeous. Crazy.
Yeah. So I actually funny story. I had Leachies in college. So what am I, 35? That'd have been like, I don't know, 15 years ago. So this was back, remember the days of the Pangea forums, AJ?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So somebody messaged me, I think it was Melissa Walker, messaged me on the Pangea forums and was like, here's a Craigslist ad. Yeah, there he is. That's Rigatoni.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah, he's awesome. He matched my old kitchen, so it was great.
I like it.
Anyway, somebody was like, hey, there's a Craigslist ad for a guy who's getting rid of some Leachianis in Atlanta. Like, you should check this out and you should go buy them. Like, these are cool animals. So it was the year of the BP oil spill.
Yeah.
Like this connects, I promise.
That was a long time ago, man.
Was that like 2006 maybe?
Oh my goodness.
I don't even remember.
Okay.
People weren't even alive.
I remember it happening, but
yes. So
half our viewers weren't alive then.
Exactly.
They were babies.
So I've got like I messaged this guy and he's like, yeah, I still have them. If you want them, come get them. And I was like, all right. So I drive like 30 minutes south of the city. I get to this guy's house. He's moving out of it. It was a wreck. And so I'm like, you know, I'm a college kid, so I'm like, hey, like, can I see those lychees? You know. So he shows them to me. He had an original Type A and an original Type C from Steve, with all the paperwork and everything. And he sold them to me for $500.
Oh.
And I bought them. Yeah, and so he told me this, like, the reason I remember it being the year of the BP oil spill is at the time this guy was telling me that, like, the government's poisoning us and killing us and, like, he has to get out of here and move. So he's giving up his reptiles. So that's how I got them for so cheap.
So the guy was, like, fleeing the country because he was afraid of the oil spill?
Yeah, literally. He was like, you don't even know. Like, you should leave
$500. That's
and I was like,
money right there.
Yeah, and I was like, cool, I just want your lychees.
You're like, hey, you got any more lizards you want to sell?
Yeah, pretty much. So anyway, I bought them from him, and I think I didn't have them very long, if I'm honest about it. I actually ended up giving them to Limey. And I don't think, like, I was not, how should I put this? Lychees were not what I thought they were going to be, is the best way to put it. Like, lychees are a display, like they're better to look at, not to touch, in my opinion.
Okay.
So like at the time I had cresteds. Think about it, like I grew up on fat tails and bearded dragons and leopard geckos. So I have these like beautiful lychees and I'm getting bit up nonstop. Like the male was so aggressive that he would do like a backflip off the wall to try to bite me if I reached in there.
Oh no.
So I was like, I had them for probably a year and I ended up being like, this is not really fun for me. It's like, it's not something I can handle and hold. So I ended up giving them to Limey. I think we may have traded them for a pair of red Ackies. So I've had monitors as well. But anyway, I had lychees years ago. And I think I came to the realization of like, you know, not every reptile has to be held, put it that way. And anyway, I was talking to Brian at one point. He wanted a male Chahoua that I had. He was like, hey, would you be open to this as a trade? And I was like, yeah, for sure. So I have one of his high color island cross females, and then I have that female as well. So
nice.
Yeah.
So are those just pets, or are you going to breed them eventually?
Right now they're just pets.
Nice.
Yeah.
Those are pretty nice pets to have. Pretty nice lychees for pets.
Good display animal.
The CAMK one she's really beautiful. Like, honestly, I probably should breed her because she's a beautiful animal. Like, she's really dark and has a lot of purple. And I think, like, when I've showed Brian pictures of her, he's usually like, if you ever want to get rid of that animal, let me know first. So.
I've got one at my house that every time Brian comes, he's like, you sure you won't sell that one back? And I'm like, yep, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
If I ever do, you're the first one I'll call.
Yeah.
So Michael, you've been keeping crested in 2005, and you've had a bunch of stuff before that. It's throughout your life. And so cresteds moved to lychees.
Mm-hmm.
And then how did you get into the Chahoua? I'm gonna call him Chahoua.
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to think. At one point, I also had Iridactylodes, a couple of the species, I had Sarah's a couple years ago as well. I had a Garg at one point. I think I've had most things.
Just to try out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think like I got into Chahoua in 2009, and at that time, it was when the world was still, I mean, it still is, but like it's pretty crested crazy. So it was like everybody was focused on cresteds, but it was also around that time there was a lot of focus and hype around Leachianus, like the largest gecko species in the world. So it was really like, it was one or the other. Like you were either a cresty mommy or you were into the Leachies. No,
I thought I was the only one that talked about crested mommies.
No.
The crested mommy.
So, and
I'm
like
get canceled for that.
I love it.
I had, like I said, I actually had cresteds. I think I had them in total for like 4 or 5 years or something.
That's quite a long time.
Yeah, and I mean, I enjoyed them, but this was a time when not a lot of people cared much about like Sarahs or Chahouas. Like gargoyles were just starting to get popular. Yeah. And I don't remember where it was, but I saw a Chahoua at some point, and I was like, I don't know, those are kind of cool. And the first one that I bought, you know, I mean, he was a mainland, so he wasn't like particularly stunning, but he had a great personality. And I think my experience working with both is Chahoua are just a lot more interactive. I would go out on a limb and say intelligent, no offense, than cresteds. So like for some reason, immediately for me, it just clicked, and I was like, this is cool. I really like these. Yeah. And so that's actually where it started. I got the first one in 2009, and then
did you get it at a show?
I remember, it's funny you say this. I ordered it from a guy who lived in Maryland, but I can't remember what his website was called. Like I can see the website, and I remember getting it in the mail, but it wasn't at a show. And then it was shortly thereafter, later that year, I got a pair of Troger mainlands from Steve. And then I got my first PI from Phil Tremper.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So you built your collection starting from there, and just continue to collect and whatnot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't, I no longer keep mainlands. Sometimes I get that question. Yeah. And I really enjoyed working with mainlands. I think that we can talk more about it if you want, but I think one of the hard things was just like finding true mainland lines that you can trust. And so I hit a point where like I'd gotten mainlands from the people that I knew had pure mainland lines, and I couldn't find any more of them. And I just kind of ran it. Like I just kind of hit the end of the road. And like, it was at that point where a lot of the white collar stuff was taking off. And I was like, you know, it makes more sense for me to focus my time and my energy on the Pine Islands.
So even in 2009, 2010, the white collar stuff was already moving and popular, or was it later?
Yes. Would you like to know how much a white collar Chahoua was in 2009?
Yeah.
$500, $600.
I think $400.
Oh no!
I have
the first. Go ahead.
I was going to tell you. So I've showed Brian this before, but I have an email from like 2007, 2008 between me and Steve Chimelli, and I was like, "Hey, do you have any Chahoua available?" And he sent me this animal that was probably like equivalent to Brian's Vader or something. I think it was $450 or $500. Like a nice animal. I still have the email back, like it's super old, and I think I was just like, oh no, I don't have that much money, because I was like 15 or whatever. I was, because at the time I think most of the Chahuas were like $300.
Yep.
You know,
it was like
300, $325.
Yeah, our mainlands were like $250 to $300, and I think most of the Pine Islands were like, you're right, like $350. I think the first 3 or 4 that I got from Phil Tremper were like $400 or $425 or $450. Wow,
that's so cheap.
Yeah,
mine is gone. When did that switch take place in terms of it just like catapulted, and the pricing became exponential?
Yeah.
When did that happen? Was it more the recent few years?
I remember looking at it. I think it really started in about 2012 or 2013. It was like
already back then.
It was all of a sudden, you know, and I think it was for a couple years. It was like, you know, you could always get a mainland with a white collar for like $450. And AJ, I remember there was one time where I was talking to Steve, and it was back and forth, and he sent me an animal he had that was from his high white lines that like had a white collar but not as much side white, and it was like $700. I remember specifically, and I was like, I don't have $700. In retrospect, I would
have been like, man, you should have bought every one of those. He would have sold you. Yeah,
truly. But anyway, I remember I think it was the emergence of high white that started driving up the prices, and people realizing that if you get white collar from high white lines, like you can breed them, and you can maybe achieve high white every now and then if you're lucky. So it was really like 2012, 2013 that it started going up, and it's surprising to me, because it just like I think every year people talk about the value of Chahoua and are like, oh, it's going to go down. It's going to go down. And so that's now
Keeps
10
going up.
years. It really has not
People
gone
say that
down.
about crested geckos too. I remember like
Yeah.
when people were like, "Oh my gosh, $400! What a ripoff!" Like,
Yeah.
who would ever pay that? And like, even back in the day, like Brian Butler got absolutely torched for paying like 2,000 or something for an animal from AC Reptiles, and like in retrospect, I mean, with progress of an animal, I mean, the pricing just continues to rise because the demand for the highest end continues to rise. So it makes sense. It's like any other animal that is bred for color and all these different things.
Do you feel like the stuff
beautiful,
back then was just as nice? Obviously, the stuff here, as you guys have continued to,
they're way nicer
these
now.
lines, it's super crazy. But even back then, it was like pretty nice. This is 2016. Right?
That's one of the. So I honestly, I didn't really use Instagram for a long time. So that's actually one of the original PI animals that I got from Phil.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, like I didn't use Instagram for a long time, and then I'm trying to think. Maybe it was like 2018 that I started using it more again. But that animal, I think she was actually born in 2012, so she's 10 now. Yeah.
Okay.
Gorgeous.
You still have this one?
Yeah, I do.
That's so cool. Does it still breed?
She does. Yeah.
Oh wow.
She's actually one of them that, and I will talk more about it, but the male that I have her paired to is the founding male in all of my super dark projects. And so so they are one of the pair. Him actually, the one you just had your cursor on, that's her mate.
Okay.
Yeah. Or sorry, if you go down,
the one that was go down a little bit,
like
here.
the rug in the background. Yeah.
Oh, this one.
Yep. They are so pair bonded that if I have ever tried to change their pairings, they have fought mercilessly with their new mates. So they're a pair I have to, unfortunately, I have no choice. They have to stay together.
Okay.
I want to
ask.
Yeah.
I want to ask you before we get away from it, Michael. Can we talk about Sarah's for a minute?
Yeah, for sure.
AJ loves Sarah's.
So do you keep them now, or did you breed them in the past? What kind? Can you tell me about the history with them?
Yeah, I had them. I'm trying to think. I had a pair of blondes, probably 10 years ago, I would say.
Okay.
And I think just over probably the last 3 years, as the high white, I guess they're called, have become more popular. I'm like, wow, those are really beautiful. So I got a couple of them last year and earlier this year, but they're all fairly young still. I only have a couple of adults.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I have a bunch. I got to show you some at some point. But they're probably in my top 2 favorite gecko species.
Yeah.
Like, I love them. And I think they're much smarter than crested geckos.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I haven't had them in so long, and I'm sure you know a lot about this stuff, but some of the talk about the blondes and the higher white ones could be 2 different subspecies potentially. I'm sure
or localities.
Yeah, localities. Yeah. But the blondes that I had back in the day were wild. They were the type of gecko that when they saw me walk by, they would just start doing rounds around their tank and just go nuts. And not to say that the ones I have now don't move pretty quick, but they're not as wild as the ones that I had before. I can pull them out and within a minute or two they settle down and sit on your hand like a Chahouas, cool. Honestly. So they're cool. I've enjoyed them so far.
So you're not breeding them currently. You're just growing some out.
Yeah.
How many do you have right now? Are you growing a bunch out or just a couple?
I think I have 15.
Okay, so you've got a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
It's almost as much as AJ.
Yeah.
How many do you have, AJ? 20?
I think I have 20 adults. I've got a handful of babies, but yeah.
Yeah,
they're
AJ,
awesome animals, man.
I would love to pick your brain on them sometime because I think in the little bit of research I've been doing, it sounds I think I remember in 2009, 2008, there was so little written and available about Chahoua, and I'm surprised because all these years later, there's even less available about Sarah's.
I mean, there's pretty much nothing. I've picked so many people. So the last Tinley, I kind of made it my mission to talk to people that I felt were like successful with Sarasinorum. So I was talking with Tom Wood. I talked with Joe Hupp. I talked with like Tremper. I talked with Derek Dunlop on the phone. I talked with all these different people, and I'm like, I feel like I'm struggling with them, right? I was telling them, I'm like, I can't get consistency out of them at all. And I talked to all these different people, and what I was told was basically, yeah, neither do we. So I was like, that's not the answer I want to hear, because I've had them since 2008. I've had them a long time. Actually, in like 2010, a guy named Kent Householder. I don't know if you remember Kent.
I remember
Householder.
that name. Yeah.
He got the majority of Michael Troger's Sarah collection from Germany, and I bought those all from him.
Okay.
And so, like the Troger Kogus, like the lychees, like Michael Troger, right? So I bought his Sarah collection, which was not a lot of animals. I think it was maybe like 10 or 12 adults at that time. And some of those bloodlines still live on, but none of them were white collar. They were all normals.
Yeah.
And I remember back in the day, actually, we had all the normals and Europe had all the white collars. And they didn't really cross a lot, other than Troger had normals.
Yeah.
And so in Europe, whatever, it's like whatever you can't have, you want. So the normals were expensive.
Yeah.
And the white collars were cheap.
Yeah.
And then here we were like, man, we got to get the white collars. And so they started kind of sneaking in, and more people, people obviously had them, but just when have you ever walked by a table and there's 50 Sarasinorum on it?
When I saw them on your table at Atlanta, it was like one of the few times I've seen them in person.
Yeah. I mean, they're not a prolific animal. Okay. They can be, because the first year I ever bred my first pair of Sarahs, I got 8 clutches from a female.
Wow. Okay. Nice.
The next year I got 0. The next year I got 3, and then it was like 3 or 0, 4 or 0 clutches per year. They would alternate and lay like Chahoua numbers and then none. And so I was just like, man, what is it diet? Is it UV? I've done UV. I've done diet. I've done big cage, small cage, loaded with cork or hides, more, barren, trios, singles, pairs. One thing I can say is do not breed them in trios. Don't do it.
I've heard
that the females will kill each other.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Did yours use UVB out of curiosity?
I didn't see a big difference, but maybe it's just the bulbs available when I did it back then, because I was hearing from I don't know who I was talking to. Somebody recently, maybe it was on the podcast. I don't know who I was talking to, but they were saying that they had tried UVB. Oh, no, I think it was like through the grapevine through Ryan McVeigh from VivTech.
Yeah.
He was talking about somebody had tried UV on Sarasinorum, and they had animals that were looked like chronically egg bound, and they just started shotgunning inverts out. Like they were almost like clogged up.
Okay.
And so I don't know. I didn't see a big difference.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Do you use, and we'll get into this later, but do you use UVB on your Chahoua?
Yes, they all have UVB. So this, like everything other way, I guess, behind me, the default is I usually offer UVB to everything. The cages right here are like those 4 are actually the larger Sarasinorum that I have. I've been sort of watching their habits with UVB, which is interesting. I feel like once they settled in, I have one who very regularly will, I have a mushroom ledge up on the side, will bask pretty much every day. But the other 3 really don't use it. So it's interesting. Yeah.
I think we should definitely keep in contact once you start breeding them and stuff, because I'm trying some new stuff this year too, and I've got a lot more adults going. So I think I have a little bit more sample size to be able to explore where I didn't before. So but They're a passion project for me.
Yeah, they're a really cool species. I've really enjoyed them so far, so it's easy to see how you love them.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so-
I have some insane ones, like ones that the body is almost black, and then the spots are like
very white.
bright white, and then
Yeah.
the circled in black. So
Yeah.
the spots are like 3D on the animals.
Yeah, that's really
I
cool.
think it was a
They're
couple
so
weeks
cool.
ago. AJ was showing us. He's showing me like a video of his Sarahs and how
Yeah, we're like FaceTiming.
Yeah,
I was pairing a bunch of Sarahs up, and then Harry's like, "How do you have this many?" I'm like, "I don't know. They just
AJ has like boxes and boxes of like Sarah.
Yeah.
Like, can I have some of those? Like, then I saw you, Michael. You were posting some of the that you got some Sarahs, and I was like, oh, well, I'm gonna get some Sarahs now.
Yeah, they're cool.
I get FOMO, by the way.
The other thing I think a lot of like AJ, you know way more about this than I do, but I think the other thing I've been reading about is Sarah obesity, which is kind of interesting. I'll hit you up. We could chat more about it, but yeah,
they get
it's
fat
like,
really easy.
yeah, and I think the link seems to be that when they get fat,
They don't
they're
breed.
breeding exactly.
Oh.
But I think like a lot of species, in my experience, are like that. Like if they get overweight, like
But
breeding goes down.
Man, I can't. I mean, some of these things I can't get them to thin out. I barely feed them. I don't. I don't know how to thin them out. I feed them like once a week.
God,
It's crazy. I give them what I give like a juvenile crested gecko once a week, and
Yeah.
they're still like morbidly obese.
Ugh.
Maybe
Yeah.
they're just not supposed to eat diet. Maybe they're just supposed to be like insect feeders. And that's it.
that
I don't know.
so
Are they very active? Maybe they need a lot of
They're
activity.
pretty
and-
active. Yeah.
Okay, and maybe they don't get that in the cages, right?
Maybe they need
Yeah.
bigger cages. I don't know.
that could be, yeah,
Yeah.
Anyway.
We'll talk more.
yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Back to some of the Chahoua. So coming into Chahoua and as a new breeder, is it similar to the morphs, like cresteds? Like how does Chahoua work? Like starting from scratch, we don't know anything about Chahoua, right? Like what are
Okay.
the morphs? How do you break into it? How do I figure out what's what?
What are the different varieties that if somebody was looking to get into Chahoua, like what are they looking at?
Yeah,
as far
like
as
there's
options?
Harleys or tricolors or empty backs or quads, for cresteds, but for the Chahoua, how do we figure that stuff out?
So the way that I generally think about it and reference it is there's like no collar, there's no white collar, there is and of that there can be a lot of different options, right? Like you can have red, you can have orange, you can have pink, you can have animals that have a ton of pattern and contrast, you can have animals that have almost none. And then there's sort of like split collar or like white wings, like some people call it, which is where there's like white pattern across the back of the neck, but it doesn't connect and form a collar. There's white collar, which does have a solid white band across the neck. Then I think to some degree you can have animals that have a white collar with a small amount of side white. I don't know that I would necessarily call that high white, because I think a number of Chahoua actually have like little bits of white on the side. But then I think you have high white, which is the white collar plus a more like sizable amount of white on the back or on the sides and the back, like base of the tail. And then you've got I guess what I would say is super white or super high white, which is a fair, like when I was listening to Brian's explanation for this, I think I agreed like more than 50% of the body being covered in white would be like super white or super high white.
So this one would this be like a super white right here, or not quite?
I don't know. She's probably close if she's not quite there. Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of it is just kind of the patterning of the white and the percentage of white on the body is kind of.
I
how
would
you
say
put
so.
it.
And I think like I've had this conversation with people. I do think that the better way to reference like different Chahoua is more so phenotypes than morphs per se. Like, morphs are like, it's easy if you put two things together, you have a pretty high probability of it proving out again. Like when you get to Chahoua that fire up and fire down, and some of them have white and some of them don't, and sometimes the traits don't carry over, seems a little different than just morph, I guess is probably the best way to put
Got
it.
it. Okay.
So
Would
Phil
you-
Tremper owns this gecko now.
Oh, yeah?
Sometimes
Oh,
I think about
interesting.
this gecko. Phil, years and years ago, like basically begged me. It was like, "Will you please sell me this gecko?" and like, Phil has done a lot for me over the years, so I was like, "Yes, sure, I will sell it to you." But it was really cool because it hatched out completely gray scale. Like there was no
Very-
brown, like no brown, no yellow, no green, no tan. It was completely gray.
Wow. This is amazing.
Exampic.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I think I maybe asked Brian this, but what's your opinion on how the white trait works? Do you think it's just a dominance thing where, or a stacking effect where two high white animals will produce potentially a higher white animal? Can you breed high white to say like a high color animal with no collar, no white? What percentage of white do you get out of that? Is it 50-50? Is it 0? Meaning that it might be a recessive thing. Do you have any idea how that works?
No. No. So like this is actually a good
short answer.
No. Short answer. No. This is one of the interesting things because when people contact me, I'm sure it's the same thing. Like everybody sees and wants a high white or a super high white Chahoua, and then they see the price tag and they're like, "Oh, never mind, that's not what I want." So I built my collection and the stuff that I have literally from like originally breeding white collar animals that I got like in 2009 and 2010. So it's like, for years I was breeding like white collars, and every now and then one would pop out that had like a strip or a little bit of side white, and you're like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like this is the one. So then like that happens with another pair, and then you take those two animals and you put them together, and like even like I will say, even with the few super white pairs that I have in a season, if they produce 6 babies, like they'll probably produce 3 that are like super white, maybe 1 or 2 that are like high white or white collar, and maybe 1 that doesn't have a collar or doesn't have much of a collar. So my experience with it is, I think the higher white the animals are that you can pair together, the higher probability you have of getting a high amount of white.
Okay.
But as I often tell people, like genetics do certainly play a role. Buying less white animals from high white pairings, you will still produce high white or super white, however you want to put it, but probably on a less frequent basis.
Okay. So it's kind of just like
your percentages would be lower.
Yeah, you're just kind of like gene stacking some of those selective traits of the white, and then eventually the more you produce, the more and more it gets.
Consistency.
So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually really helpful.
Yeah. So, like we talked about it a little bit when you were asking me questions as well. But it is like if you look at, for example, like ET Geckos, like one of the males that she has came from Steve, very simple white collar, but came from Steve's high white lines, and is probably her most all-time high white producing male. So it really does it really does happen. And I think one of the other things I've noticed is there are certain combinations. Like I don't get as good of a result, I'll say, if I pair like Leapin' Lychee's high white to Leapin' Lychee's high white. So it's like when you mix in like some Tremper or some Rapashi, and like over time, like people like Brian and Aaron from ET like have kind of I don't necessarily use the word line because I don't think there's like talking about lines in Chahoua, I think is you go down a road with that. But people have these pairings that like that male from ET Geckos where it's like, okay, cool, that's a pretty potent high white producing line. Like let me get something from him, and then maybe you get something from Brian, and then you look at the lineage, and like Brian can tell you, I track all of the lineage I have back almost like as I can get it to like wild caught. Like I've asked people for every bit of lineage they have, and so what I've seen personally is when you can find some of those animals, like some Trempers, some Rapashi, some Leapin' Lychees, the combination of them gives me higher white overall than just trying to stack like Leap and Leechy's high white, which I think is what a lot of people were doing for years.
Okay. So rather than grabbing all my stuff from you, I should spread out. Spread out and give a Susan some money and ET Geckos and just kind of fuse them all together is the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, what do you? I know we have this question here, but what would you say the best way to kind of a new person to get into Chahoua? How would they do that? Like, if you were going to start and maybe you don't have an unlimited budget, how would you do it?
Let's see. If you don't have an unlimited budget, I guess like some of the advice I give people, and not just about Chahoua, but I think this is kind of an aside, but I think that there are a lot of people who see the price tag on Chahoua and are like, oh, I want to do that. Like I've had multiple people message me like every week being like, I want to get rich. Like, how do I do this? And I can tell you, like, there is no worse way to think that you are going to get rich than on Chahoua. And like, I like hear it directly from me. Like, it's not going to happen. And so
Michael, you can send them this podcast from now on. Don't even answer.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just listen to this.
But it's like the biggest thing is, for people like, like it sounds like a humble brag, but like at this point, breeding Chahoua is not hard for me. But getting to the point where you have like your formula down for like feeding and supplementation and pairing and humidity, like I've been working with this species since 2009 and I'm still learning things every year. And so you look at people like Brian and people like the Gilpins and people like me, it's like we've been doing it a long time. And I'm not to say that you can't do it too, but the advice I usually give people is start with what you like the most. Like, I actually get a fair number of people who, if they haven't been exposed to high white, will be like, I love pink. Like, I just want a high pink one. Like, that's what I really love the most. I want pink. And I'm like, cool, I can hook you up with that. So when people approach me and are like, I want to start and I want to do this, usually the first question I ask is, what do you like the most? Like, do you like red? Do you like pattern? Do you like no pattern? Do you want to, like, do you want white collar? Do you want side white? Like, there's a lot of different avenues that you can go down. And I think it goes for any species, not just Chahoua, but you'll be the most successful breeding what you enjoy the most. Yeah. Because it's not always easy. Like, specifically with Chahoua, you're going to have like females who calcium crash. You're going to have pairs that fight. Like, you're going to lose babies in the egg. And like, if you like what you're doing, that will keep you going. But if you're in it for the money, it's easy to see things like that and get burned out and like go in the other direction.
That's good.
So usually though, most people want high white. So what I tell them is like,
okay, let's talk about a high white. Yeah.
Well, that's so everyone's showing. That's most shown in everybody's feed. So that's actually going to be what people want. So
yeah, I think so too. But usually I give people the advice that I've given to you guys before, which is just like, everybody has a budget. Like, go find somebody, like, talk to a breeder, find somebody who has a pair that's producing high white or super high white animals and see if you can buy a less white animal from them. It's the same genetics. Like I said before, your probability of hatching super white or super high white Chahoua is probably going to go down a little bit, but it's not zero. And I mean, like, I've bought a number of animals from Brian over the years, and honestly from Aaron too, who it's like, they're not the whitest animals those pairs have produced. Like, it's either I needed a male and that's the one I could get, or I like the base color or something. And like, it's not a home run every time they breed, but for the most part, I've been pretty happy with the results.
Yeah. You guys, a side question, do you guys mix and match between you guys quite often in terms of your breeding?
Like loans or like trades, or what are you talking about?
Yeah, kind of like your lines, each other's lines.
I don't ever do loans. I did a loan with somebody a long time ago, and
it went south.
It went south. Yeah, this person called me, and she was like, "Hey," and actually the animal, I knew a guy in New York who literally had a pair of F1 Chahoua, like could trace them back. The babies obviously were all F2s. So I had a pretty nice F2 Pine Island male with like a fat white collar, and this person that I did a bloodline trade with, or a breeding loan, she sent me a female for a male that I had. I sent her my male. She called me one day and was like, "Hey, I just want to let you know, like, I went in and your male was just dead."
Oh no.
And I was like, "Okay, can you tell me a little more than that, please?" And she was like, "No, like, I don't really know what happened. Like, he just was dead, and so I'm sorry." And so, not to say that like people can't structure breeding loans to be better than that, and that was a one-off situation, but like, from a value perspective, like, I'm not going to put a $10,000 gecko in the box and send it to you to play with, as much as I love you.
Maybe if it's your neighbor or something.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing too is I no longer really change pairs around. Like, all of my pairs are pretty set. If I ever want to change something, I take their offspring and put them with the offspring from another pair that I'd be interested in putting them together. So splitting pairs has not worked very well for me historically.
So do the Chahoua kind of bond? You kind of talking about that a little bit. Bond, like if they bond for life or for a long time, is that pretty common?
I would say it's
like
more
leeches,
common
right?
than not. I have a couple pair. I would say, I don't know, what do I have? Like 36 pairs or 40 pairs or something. I would say probably half of them are extremely tightly bonded.
I see.
I would say there's probably another 25% of them that are like, they do fine. And then I would say the other 25% is probably like either first year pairs or first year breeding animals. And so I think the first year that you put them together, like, I don't find that they get as close and pair bond quite as closely as more mature animals do. So I'm sure you guys have read like the Life of Giant Geckos. Like, in that book, they talk about the signs of how you know that your Leachianas have pair bonded. Like, they lay together, their skin touches, like things like that when they're like resting. I think it's very similar with Chahoua. So yes, and I mean, I have taken a couple pairs where I can tell that they're not very bonded and tried to put them with other, like, in different arrangements with a different mate and see if it works better. And sometimes it has. It's been fine. But like I said, I also have had times where I've tried to switch pairs and the result has been like really terrible fighting. So yeah.
So you can't go into it thinking immediately it's going to be like a 1.3, 1.5 pairing. Sometimes it doesn't work like that.
I know some people keep trios. At one point I bought a trio. I've tried trios before.
Yeah.
Usually one female ends up dominant. In my experience, one female ends up dominant and will fight another female. And I think usually the male ends up choosing one female. Not to say that he won't breed with the other.
Yeah.
But my personal perspective is usually the second female ends up beat up and also like not producing as well as she could if you just put her with her own male anyway. So everything I do is usually pairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got you.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the dark Chahoua? I'm curious. We talked with Brian about it, but I want to hear your point of view, because I know you have some dark animals, some dark Chahoua. Could you talk a little bit about, like, in your opinion, what's going on with that? Like, Brian had said, a lot of those fade to green. Some of them don't, but I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah. This, I would say, I think there's going to be different perspectives on the dark thing, but I think the number of animals that exist that have like truly dark or black base color as adults is very, very small. So especially a lot of the mainland animals go through a dark phase. I would say it's like 15, sometimes to like 35 grams. Like, they will turn almost black. I will tell you that 99.9% of the time, especially mainlands, most of them later turn brown or green. I've had mainlands, I bred them for a long time. I've had many of them that hit the phase of turning black, and then I've had many of them that turned out to be green. I will say, like, the stuff that you're sharing right now, most of the reason that I share like things like this that are an adult pair is because in my experience, an adult pair that maintains that dark of a base color
Yeah.
is not very common.
Uh,
The only other person I've seen who's like has like adult animals that literally have dark or black base color is Noah's Ark geckos. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's got a couple that he produces that like, if you can show me an animal that's like 45 to 50 plus grams and really, really dark, I think that's something different than when people show you animals that are like 15 to 20 grams and very dark, because in my experience, like that usually always turns to green or brown or sometimes even like rusty red color. So, so I think, and like even if you look at this gecko, like he still has some orange base color. Like I have that male still, and he does still have a lot of black, but like he has some orange. So I think it'll be interesting
cool.
to see where it goes over the next couple years. The pair that you just had up on the screen a minute ago,
Let me see. I'll pull back up.
that's a male. That's a male that I produced a couple years ago. Yeah. So I produced that male, like I think 2 years ago. And then I bought that female from ET Geckos. We actually did a trade for it. And it's interesting because remember a couple minutes ago, you had up that male in the middle of the screen that I was like, yeah, he's the pair to the female I had from Phil. So I got him when he was young from a guy named Justin Thomas. And when I was just happy at that time to get Leap and Leachy's lines. Like he's from Leap and Leachy's, and so I was like, cool, I just want those lines. Well, he grew up and he basically never got any base color and turned like super dark. And so there were years where I was actually planning on selling him because I love, like, my preference is for super high color. And I took him, and then I think like whatever it was 3 years ago, put him with another female who like she like wasn't as dark, but she had pretty dark base color. And they ended up producing this male and another female who are also really, really dark. So, and actually, like, I would say this is a good example of a gecko that like is probably in an intermediate phase of being really dark.
Okay.
But that animal ultimately turned bright orange. So,
okay.
like a lot of Chahoua go through that change where they may be dark or they may be light. Like a lot of them hatch like a tan or brown color and then change throughout their lives. So the percentage of animals that reach adulthood and keep that super dark or black base color is very, very, very small, and it's very uncommon.
Okay.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But you're trying to produce it consistently is what you're working on, obviously, right?
Yeah, it would be cool if I can. I have like that pair you had up a minute ago. They're a new pair for this year, and then I have 2 other pairs that have produced super dark animals into adulthood. So we'll see what happens. I get like I see it pop up from time to time, and I get messages from people who are like, yeah, look at this gecko, I got it, and it's like black. And I'm like, very, very cool. Like, and essentially people will sort of be like, it's black, like, not it's xanthic, but like it's something like that. And I'm like, cool, we'll send me pictures in like another 20 grams and we'll see how it looks.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, like those animals end up green or brown.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It's like some of the, encrusted geckos, there's certain things that need to get to 25, 30, 40 grams to really show what they're going to be,
Yeah.
So this is just Chahoua's version of that for sure.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's cool.
Yeah, Michael, as you guys are developing the Chahoua, what are some things that you guys can look forward to in terms of the variations of the patterns and the colors, and what are things that you feel like will be coming up in the near future, if any?
Yeah, good question. I would say I think white is going to be like the thing for a while. I know that there are some folks who are like working towards wanting to just produce a uniformly white Chahoua. So I feel like
all white.
I've heard that's the goal for some people. So I think that'll be a thing. A couple people be included have hatched out animals with really prominent stripes. So I have a couple like that, like two really cool like long white stripes. I would love to be able to breed and produce stripes. I think it, like, in person it's really cool and really stunning looking. Like the pattern of Chahoua, you know, it's obviously not reticulated, but it's like the pattern sort of being kind of modeled and then having like white stripes up the middle is really cool. So I would say that's one. I've seen Reptile City, Korea mention that they've hatched out like hypo Chahoua. Have you guys seen those?
I saw the pictures of them.
Yeah. So I know of two other people who have hatched out and have animals that are very similar to that, with like completely like zero pattern, like almost that yellow lime green base color. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with those over time. ET Geckos actually has one that is like completely patternless. It's like tan yellow, which is really a cool looking animal. And then I think the other one probably that I see people focusing on is the dark ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The other one that I think I haven't heard many people mention, and I like sometimes I'm hesitant to talk about it because when people talk about size, I think it can lead rather to like overfeeding and power feeding. But I have a couple animals that are in the 90 to 100 plus gram range.
Wow.
And I will say there are times like when you hold a Chahoua that's 100 grams, it's like, that's a pretty cool thing.
That's
so
it's like a super giant leopard or giant leopard, which is
so yeah. I don't know, like we'll see what happens in the future. Obviously, you know, it takes 2 to 3 years to grow up a Chahoua, so it takes a while to figure out if that's going to be a thing or not. But I have a pair, the female's about 100 grams usually, and the male's like 85. Wow. And their offspring hatch huge. Like they hatch like 4.5 or 5 grams. Like
interesting.
They're usually they usually hit like 55 to 60 grams at a year old, just being fed the same way as all of my other animals. So I think size could be another one too, that just is something interesting to play with and see where it goes.
Pretty cool.
Have you been to Tinley before, Michael?
Mm-mm.
Last time when we were at Tinley, there was somebody who had a gargoyle that was like 150 grams. I have a gargoyle male that's like 100 grams, and he's impressive, but that thing was just like, it's a lychee. It's as big as like a Nilana.
It's a balloon.
It is. There was a person at the Atlanta show who had a gargoyle that looked like a softball with legs. I don't know. So I don't know. It might have been in the same category.
Yeah. Michael, have you tried any type of like temp sexing, or you know how Andrew and Sarah, they tried temp sexing cresteds and they found different structure changes and sizing changes. Have you tried that with the Chahoua?
I haven't tried it in relation to temp sexing, but a couple years ago now, when I first got into it, it was when a lot of people were talking about how they incubated Chahoua for like 160 and 170 days, and like a bunch of them were drowning in the egg and things like that. And one time Phil Tremper gave me a piece of advice, which was, you really don't want Chahoua eggs going over 90 days of incubation. And ever since then, I bought an incubator, and so I keep my temperatures to give me eggs in like 80 to 90 days. So
what's the temp range, by the way?
It's usually like 78 to 79 roughly. I would say. It's like, I honestly, part of it, like my incubator's right there, but because I have a new house and everything is in the basement, like even it's a sea serpent's hot box, but like, you know, the air that incubators take in is obviously dependent on what's around them. And so even though I have like the temperature set for 79, in the middle of winter, like December and January, there were some times where I came down here and it was at like 75 just because it was cold down here. So that happens. But yeah, that's like, again, I've never messed much with temp sexing, but like looking at size at hatching and things like that. I generally incubate like 77, 78, 79, and get babies that are somewhere between 3 and 4 grams.
Gotcha.
Nice.
If you go past 90 in terms of the temps, or 90 days, temp it so that it goes past, it just goes way down in terms of structure
So
and livelihood?
I think it's more the calcium matrix on a Chahoua egg is a little bit different than some of the other New Caledonian species I've worked with. So I think the thing is more that if you're incubating and it's taking you like 140, 150, 160, or I guess at that point you're probably not incubating, you're probably doing room temperature. You probably have an incubation medium that's going to dry out. You might have to add water to it again, or like you might need to open up the container and, however it works. The cardinal sin of incubating Chahoua eggs is when you start adding and re-adding and like letting water and letting substrate dry out. So the thing is, if you can keep it in that range, in my experience, of like 90 days, roughly, I mean, if it's 80 days or it's 100 days, it's not a big deal. But that's kind of a window where the incubation medium that you start with is usually the incubation medium that the eggs can hatch with without needing extra water or drying out or things like that.
Okay.
And so are you doing like Tupperwares or tackle boxes, and are you using perlite or like aquatic pond soil, or what's kind of your go-to?
Yeah, I every pair has like a sandwich Tupperware. You know what I mean? Like the Ziploc. Yeah. Yep. So I've used Repashy Super Hatch, and in the last couple years, like I've also tried perlite. So in the last couple years, I've used vermiculite.
Oh, cool. And you've been liking that?
Yeah, it works. It works great.
Was there a reason for the switch, or just kind of playing around with it?
The only thing I will say is the Repashy Super Hatch, I think being like clay based, was more apt to dry out at like towards the end of that window. And the vermiculite stays a little bit more consistently wet.
Interesting.
Which like there's still a fine line there in terms of like how wet do you have the medium when you put the eggs in it versus how wet do you want it to be at the end. Yeah. But I've just found that it's a little bit easier to control for me with vermiculite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Couple more questions. For you, Michael, for at least for my end, until AJ wants to ask you about caging and whatnot.
Sure.
But are like kind of the crested world, females are much harder to find, and so the value in general is higher unless you have like a super stud male. Is it similar like that with the Chahoua?
I will say I think it tends to alternate every couple years. Like every couple years, everybody's crazy looking for females, and then the next couple years, when everybody's stocked up on females, everybody will be crazy looking for males.
Okay.
In my experience, I would say the highest white animals that a pair produces are likely to be female. I would say that's probably
interesting.
70% likely. Like every now and then you will get a really nice high white male, but most of the high white animals that I produce are female. So it does create, I would say, almost like this supply and demand element with high white and super white male Chahoua, where they're very uncommon and they're very hard to find. But if you have them or you produce them or you can get them, it is a very hot commodity. And so then I think like the other part of it is you do not have to pair Chahoua. Like you can put one male with like 4 or 5 different females over a season and it probably will be fine.
I see.
But I think if you do keep them in pairs and you think about it, like you no longer have one male to move around to multiple females, and so therefore you need more males. Like you need more nice males in situations like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's kind of in between lychees and crusteds, as far as like you can move them a little bit, it sounds like, but the best practice is probably to leave them. So it probably helps have a better balance. People aren't harem breeding them. So
I think so too. Yeah.
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 That sounds nice. That's honestly my least favorite thing about crested geckos.
Yeah.
Is that imbalance between the sexes for
The
sure.
females, the males. It's
The
crazy.
other thing for me too is like I just like I keep everything in pairs, and like I said, I've tried trios and things like that, or I've tried like moving a male around between females, but also in terms of just getting maximum genetic variation to be able to pair in the future, it's easier to just do everything as pairs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You have all that extra variety.
Yeah,
And also
Exactly.
variety to offer customers too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, AJ. One more question. When you're
Yeah.
looking for just because I'm so interested in chewies right now, and I just got a couple from you, Michael, that
Yeah.
I'm excited to receive, and I got one from Brian. But when you're looking for shopping for a chewy, what are you looking for besides lineage? Are you looking for health wise? Are you looking for its structure? Are you looking for the what exactly are you looking for? For cresteds, you want a healthy looking animal that's looks beefy and not weak,
Yeah.
right? So
Head
what does that look like?
structure, eyes to
Yeah.
snout,
What
all
does that look
that.
like for a chewy?
My answer to this will be somewhat unconventional, but I prefer to buy Chahoua from people who keep them the most like I keep them.
Got it.
So what that means is, like, I think there are still variations in terms of like what diets people feed, or do you feed insects, or how often do you feed insects, things like that.
Yeah.
I would say over the years, I've bought so many animals from so many people, and there is absolutely a window with Chahoua. I would say it's, somewhere probably in the realm of like 10 to 30 grams, where if you have an animal that's not a good feeder, or it's finicky, or it won't take to insects,
Yeah.
that is not an animal I want to breed. And
Okay.
so in my personal experience, I would take an animal that is a solid eater. It's kept by someone that's similar to how I keep my animals, so I know that when I get it here, it's going to thrive and do well. More so than an animal that just is like high white or something like that, for example.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that holds true to most species. I think like health is just as important as looks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, like I will tell you, I bought a couple really beautiful animals over the years by people who, like, let's say they didn't feed insects, or didn't feed insects as readily or something like that. And I've had a very hard time adjusting those animals once they get into my care. And I've had a couple instances where they didn't make it, believe it or not. So
Wow.
it's like looking at, I've done this enough times over the years, like animals that feed well, like shed well, are healthy weight, and things like that are the animals that grow up to be the healthiest and the best breeders and things like that. So that's really the most important thing to me.
Yeah. Do you feel like the Chahoua breaking into the Chahoua community is much harder because it's less common, or is it just because it's pricier to break into?
That's a good question.
Because there's a ton of crested breeders, right? So
Yeah, I do definitely think that they're cost prohibitive, which I understand.
Okay.
Like, I think not a lot of people, like, you can go to a show and buy like a $200 crested that's a really pretty animal, and that's going to get you hooked, and then maybe you're willing to pay for like a $500 one the next time around, and like maybe you buy a $700 one the next time around. But if you go and you're walking around a show and you see an animal that's like $1,700, like, that doesn't even, you're like, I think a lot of people are like, that's ridiculous. I would never spend that on a lizard.
no,
So I like the price is probably definitely part of it.
okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about your caging.
Okay.
We'll start. I want to talk about like care, diet, temperatures, UVB, misting, water bowls, all this different stuff, right? So
Okay.
I'm going to kind of walk through and geek out a little bit. So tell me a little bit about caging, maybe the caging evolution. I see you've got a lot of PVC, but did you always use PVC, or did you use tubs, glass? Could you maybe walk us through your evolution?
Yeah, sure. I would say for a long time I was probably a glass traditionalist. Like,
Okay.
I mean, and even like aquariums, like not even exoterras.
So
And
you
I
had like
think
20-gallon talls or something.
I used to keep
Oh, no.
pairs in 29-gallon tall aquariums.
Oh
Okay.
no.
So, yeah.
That's
So
weird.
I had glass for a long time. There was a point where I tried tubs, and I think the one caveat that I want to give to people when talking about caging with Chahoua is that where you live and your things like your ambient temperature and your ambient humidity will be a significant factor in how you should keep your animals. I live in Atlanta, which, like, growing up in Florida, to me Atlanta doesn't feel humid, but when my friends come here from other places, they like tell me that they're sweating all the time. So, like, I live in a fairly friendly climate for a species that needs humidity. I say that because years ago when I like first tried tubs, they were way too humid all the time, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. Like, drill more holes, add more vents, like change the substrate. For whatever reason, I couldn't get my tubs to dry out like almost at all. So I went back to glass. I had glass for several years. I think like the switch to PVC from glass for me was probably twofold. One, when you start getting to the point where you have like an operation like this, glass is very space inefficient. Like on every single one of these racks in the old days, I used to have two 29 gallons. So where I used to have only be able to keep 2 pairs, now I can keep 6. So I think that was the first one. The second one was I had a couple years where I had really low fertility and I was getting tons of eggs, but like I would think it was like, 18 or 20% of them were fertile. And so I went through and kind of like rethought a lot of my husbandry, how I was keeping animals, like what was going on. And one of the things that I was actually, again, kind of like we were talking about with Sarah's AJ, is like there's still so little honestly written about Chahoua in comparison to crested geckos that it's like a lot of what you're going to come across as a keeper is your own trial and error. There's not a lot to rely on unless somebody's willing to like share their own information and experience with you.
Yeah.
So I was looking a lot at how people were keeping Leachianus, and a lot of what at the time people were saying was like, yeah, they actually do somewhat better in smaller enclosures that are more secure, like that have more cork and a cork ground and things like that. So the way that I was keeping them before, I didn't have cork grounds. I kind of had slabs, and like they were just kind of, 29 gallons, like a big, tall, wide enclosure. And I didn't know if it was like my males weren't able to find my females, or if there was something else that was wrong, or if the geckos didn't feel secure. The only other thing I will say is having them the way that I was keeping them at that time, all of the cages were fairly close together, and so like the pairs could see each other. So there'd be times where it was like, you'd have like a male on one side and a female on the other side, and they're like going back and forth, or male and male, or female and female. So I tried PVC because obviously that's mostly enclosed, only the front you can see through. And I really liked it because it was so much more space efficient. They weigh like 3 pounds or something. And I don't know that PVC was the reason, but I think like my fertility came back up and I had more luck with PVC. So I've done that ever since.
So what cages are you using? Because are they DW or?
Yes. So the first couple that I got were from DW. Leland was awesome, and basically we kind of worked through some dimensions, and he came up with basically what I would say was like a custom size that I wanted, and it came out to be like roughly like, I think they're 20 gallons. So unfortunately, rest in peace, Leland. When Leland started facing some health issues and things like that, was also at a time when I was expanding my collection. So I was introduced to Dale Tamura from Tamura Designs, and I was able to give him the exact dimensions that Leland and I worked out. And so now I would say it's probably about half and half. Like half of my enclosures are from Leland and the other half are from Dale.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So are those single units on, are those how big a rack? Are those 3-foot racks, 4-foot racks?
They are 3 foot. Yeah.
3-foot rack. So you can get 2
Yep.
cages on that rack.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then UVB, do you have heat lamps or do you have like puck lights or just UV?
I just have UVB now. I have used the puck lights in the past, but I
Okay.
don't think they're necessary at this point. Like for me, in my new house, they're in a basement. So even though, like I was saying before, the temperatures can get a little colder down here, they're very stable. So even it's generally like, even in the coldest part of the year, it's like 73 or 75 down here, which is not bad.
Man, I struggle to keep my basement warm enough. Even in North Carolina, are you having to run like oil heaters, or is just like all the UVB in there enough to kind of keep your temps up?
I think it does. And also it's like the way that my house sits, it's kind of random, but the way that my house sits, it's like in the middle of a hill. So truly like
so it's
my
like
entire
half
basement.
underground.
Exactly. Like most of my basement is completely underground. So the temperature down here literally is like always, I would say in a year, it seems like it maybe fluctuates 5 degrees if it's 100 degrees outside or if it's like 20 degrees outside.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Yeah. Basement is pretty life-changing when you like just from an insulative standpoint, it's pretty helpful.
It is. Yeah.
And so you had talked about cork rounds. I think I can see cork rounds in your enclosures. What would you kind of say, as much as you want to share, kind of the layout of the cages?
Yeah, I use pretty much the same layout for every cage. I think I have a couple of videos of it on my Instagram, but every pair gets 1 cork round, and then adjacent to that is 1 cork flat. And then there are like intersecting sticks that are usually like roughly 1 inch in diameter. Everybody gets 1 fake plant and 1 feeding ledge, and then I use 1 piece, like 1 cork flat on the ground for a nest area, and the females usually lay there. Yeah.
Okay.
And I've used nest boxes over the years. Like I've tried like plastic and different things, and I have the most luck. They don't use it. I've had the most luck with the cork.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah. And so do you have a misting system set up in there? Is that all getting hand sprayed?
Yeah. Actually, just until December, I was hand spraying everything you see behind me every day. So
how many cages do you have again? Sorry if I missed it.
So I've got like the adult stuff. I think I have 42. And then I have like, you can kind of see them over here this way.
Baby racks.
Yeah, but these are like the juvies, and then I've got 96 baby like shoebox racks. Okay. So obviously the baby stuff and the juvies still have to be hand misted. Yeah. But I have a misting system for all the adult enclosures, which I'm very thankful for.
What did you end up doing for a misting system? Custom, or did you?
A Miss King.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, it's worked great.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Especially if you have all the cages uniform, it probably works pretty well.
Yeah.
Because you don't have like a bunch of different sizes.
Right. Exactly.
So that's cool. So are you still offering a water bowl, or do you feel like the Miss King is sufficient?
I offer water bowls. I always have. I know some people, I think with a lot of New Caledonian species, are like, no, they don't need a water bowl. I have seen almost every gecko I have drink out of a water bowl. Like, so they all have water bowls. Same. Yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, when you miss, like they do lick, and they lick their eyes and everything. But like, I mean, for example, like in the middle of the winter, when everything is turned down, and they're only getting misted like twice a week, like I see them absolutely drink out of their water bowls. So
that's incredible. So diet. Let's talk a little bit about diet, because I think that probably similar to Sarasinorum, Chahoua they're insectivores. They eat a lot of insects.
Yeah, for sure.
So what would you say, in the ideal world, what would a Chahoua diet be? From what you've kind of dialed in, I know a lot of people feed them more insects, a little less diet, or maybe they offer both. But what would you kind of say you found has been helpful?
I feed both. I feed primarily crickets. I have just started trying to use red runner roaches. I'm interested. Like the babies are eating them readily right now, so I'm a little hesitant to like set red runners free in like natural, like, vivs for the adults and see what happens.
It's gonna infest your house.
But
They scared me, man. I couldn't do it.
They don't like, and somebody said this to me, like when you dust them, they do slow down a lot. So like when you throw them in a thing and you dust them, like they do slow down, but they do seem to have more staying power than crickets. I'll put it that way. So
so I'll tell you a quick story, and I don't want to scare you off the red runners.
Tell me.
But so there's been a lot of people, like I'll call out Robbie. Robbie like is Mr. Red Runner. And everybody's like, oh, they get outside the tub, they'll die, da 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 da. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try this. So I had like a tub of red runners that laid a bunch of eggs, right? And I put them in a cold spot, 45, 50 degrees. I'm like, all right, will these things still hatch? No problem, all hatched. All right, okay, will they hatch? Okay, I'm not gonna feed those that hatch. I'm gonna see how long they live.
Yeah.
Those things grow. What are they eating? I don't know. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to get them really cold. I took a little bin and I put them outside 30 degrees. They warmed up. No problem. Right back to life. I'm like, no way. If these things get out of my house, it's game over.
I mean, they look like wood roaches. Like you live in North Carolina. It's the same as it is here. Like wood roaches look just like that. So
I know. So I would like everybody that's like, oh, unless you live in Arizona, they won't reproduce. I'm like, that's BS, man. I like when I was actually breeding them, I had them on heat tape, like 90, 95 degrees. But I put a tub at like 50 degrees and they're still laying and they're still hatching and thriving. I'm like, no.
You do dubias, Michael?
I have, in my experience, Chahoua don't really eat them. Chahoua will eat them. It's funny. I've had a couple people over the years like send me a message because I've talked about this before, and a couple people will be like, "I got my Chahoua to eat dubia, so you're wrong." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And then usually the same people will come back and they're like, "Yeah, so they stopped eating dubia."
But you also probably live how far from Gans? You probably live pretty close to Gans too.
I actually order from Josh's Frogs.
Really?
Yeah, their shipping is so much cheaper than Gans.
Gans, it's got to be like an hour from you, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not far.
Yeah.
But it's like for some reason their shipping is super expensive, so I order from Josh's. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
But I do keep some dubia like for the monitors and some other stuff.
Yeah.
But
how about mealworm for the?
Yeah, they do like mealworms, and I breed those too. So yeah, but like for some reason, like years ago when they got really big, I was like, great, like the dubia will be awesome. Chahoua will eat them, in my experience, up to about 20 or 25 grams. And for some reason, after that, they will go for them, but they will spit them right back out.
Interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, you'll have to let me know what you think of the Red Runners once you kind of play around with them more. They scared me. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
They put the fear into me, and I'm like, ugh.
I mean, like, can we, like, okay, so I'm sure this is not just happen at my house, but every now and then a cricket gets out. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I have so many dead crickets at my house.
Okay.
Yeah.
A dead cricket is cool. Like I'm fine with that. And like and living in this house with everything in the basement, they never make it upstairs, which is fine. A roach? A roach might be a problem for me. Like if people start coming over and there's like, you know, a roach here or there, or a roach runs across the floor, like that's a different, like, people are used to feeding reptiles crickets, but if like roaches start running across the floor, I'm not down for that. So yeah, wish me luck.
Keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
Burn it.
You'll be good.
Yeah.
Burn it. Burn the house.
Burn them all.
Right.
Oh, no. And so you had talked about temperatures in the basement being pretty stable. What is kind of your ideal temp? Are you shooting for mid 70s, high 70s, ideally?
Let's see. I would say in the winter time, I like them to get into the low 60s, which is easy to do if I don't turn the lights on.
Low 60s, like 62, 64?
Like 63, 64, yeah. And I don't keep them at that level the entire winter, but having like a couple of days during the winter that they hit that level is good with me.
So it cools them down and it just allows them to...
Do they eat when they get that cold?
Mm-mm.
Yeah,
they don't. But they stop eating, not completely, but close, in the cool down period. And then, you know, like a lot of other species, their appetite picks up when the temperatures pick up. So I think if I like use a temp gun on most of my enclosures, the enclosures have gradients. I would say they probably go from like 72 to about 77.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's like your warm cycle is there.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's pretty average for new cow stuff. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. So yeah, I mean the insects, so crickets is a big thing, even on your adults, right? That's not just
yeah.
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 So what's your feeding schedule look like? Is that 3 times a week, 4 times a week?
It depends on the time of the year. Babies get fed probably 3 to 4 times a week, just depending. And they eat primarily insects. Like I will offer them diet every now and then as well, but it's kind of a pain in the ass in bottle caps, if you know what I mean.
So a lot of those.
Yeah. So the adults, like I would say in the middle of the breeding season, adults probably get fed 4 times a week, like insects twice and diet twice. I rotate between a couple of the flavors of Pangea. Mostly they like the fig. Every now and then I will mix up like something different that I give, like a smoothie that I give the adults that's usually mango based, so it's a lot higher in vitamin A, and then I can add more calcium and stuff to it. But the base is probably Pangea. So yeah, but like, you know, like this time of year where they're starting to come up, like they eat, like they might honestly get fed twice a week, like insects once a week and diet once a week. But like as the temperatures come up and they become more active and make it into the middle of the breeding season, I feed them more often, and then it kind of tapers off towards the end as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting how even just like that slight temp drop in the winter, I always forget how much of an impact it has on feeding response.
Oh yeah, agreed.
And I think a lot of people freak out about that, me included. I'm like, oh my gosh, why are my animals eating? I'm like, oh, it's January, that's why.
Yeah, the other thing I get, like, it's about the time of the year where it happens, but I'll get a bunch of questions from people who are like, my males aren't eating, like my male's so skinny, my male this, my male's not eating. And I'm like, this is very common that at the early part of the breeding season, males like basically fully go into breeding mode and don't eat very much, whereas like females will really, their appetites will really pick up. So in my experience, it's like males don't eat that much at the middle of the season or in the beginning of the season, but by the middle of the season their appetites pick up, and sometimes they're eating pretty well even at the end of the season. And then females, their appetite picks up pretty well the early part of the season through the middle of the season, and then sort of trails off as we approach the fall. Yeah.
And Chahoua, I mean, man, those eggs take a big toll on them. Like you had said, they pull a lot of calcium to lay those eggs.
Yeah, they do.
So,
and I like
diet is crucial, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I had a couple of conversations with Matt Parks over the years just about like the different versions of the diet, and like, you know, it's been a while honestly, but Matt made a really good point to me at the time and was like, you know, the diets, mine included, are not tested on Chahoua. Like they're primarily made for crested geckos and gargoyle geckos and like maybe Leachianus, and like yes, they're probably good enough for Chahoua as well, but it's my personal opinion and experience that they need more calcium and probably more protein, and the best way to do that is by feeding them a heavy dose of crickets.
Yeah, dusted insects.
Crickets. Yeah,
exactly.
Makes sense.
Pour them in there.
Sense.
Yep.
Yeah. Michael, talking about, you know, we come to the section where we talk about kind of the market forecast, your take on how things are looking in the hobby. What does the Chahoua market look like for you? You know, you mentioned earlier that prices continue to go up or maintain, right? What does it look like for this season, this upcoming year or two? And anything to look out for?
Or predictions,
Yeah. I think that when I look at sort of supply and demand, so to speak, I think it often follows crested geckos. So I think crested geckos are the gateway drug for a lot of different species.
That is true. This is true.
I think when people get, you know, brought into crested geckos, I think quite frankly, like fast follow is like a gargoyle or a lychee or maybe a chewie. So I feel like the more people who are coming into the hobby looking at crested geckos ends up being a good thing for people who have Chahoua like me. So
Yeah.
if we think about like the boom in pet ownership from like 2020 and 2021 and like the way that we all saw our hobby like blow up in the last 3 years, I think it's a really good thing for Chahoua.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's happening too is like international markets for Chahoua are like the international markets are driving most of the demand. I've had people approach me this season with upfront money to be willing to offer them like the offspring that I have and not offer them to other people, which has never happened before. So
Don't do it. Don't sell out.
Yeah, I'm not doing it because
we need them here.
no, I mean like
Korea's gonna kill our market.
I've done this before actually. One year, a couple years ago, it was actually my last house. I was renovating and I was like, yeah, I could use extra money right now, sure. But the thing of it that I noticed is like sometimes if you take money from someone in a scenario like that, like as we all know, I don't sell everything I hatch. Like the nicest stuff that I hatch, I keep for myself. And so for me, it's like there's sometimes an element where it's like if someone feels like they've prepaid for something, they feel like they get it and like they get first choice. And that's not necessarily how it works. Like of what I offer for sale, people can choose from, but I don't offer everything for sale. If that makes sense. Yeah. So anyway, I think in general, I think it's good. Like looking at everything that's popped up with cresteds in the last couple of years, like Xanthics and Sables and like some of the other stuff. Like it's not a 1-to-1 for what's happening with Chahoua, but I think that interest benefits all species. And then I think there's still some cool stuff happening with Chahoua independently, like the dark stuff and super high whites and stripes and another thing that you don't see very often is this sort of like yellowish base color. So I'm trying I have a couple like pairs and animals that I'm working on that as well. So I think there's good stuff happening and I think it'll be good for the foreseeable future. I hope so.
Good. Side question about the coloring. How can you know what you're looking for? How do you know what's going to develop into an orange or a pink, or if you're looking specific for some sort of coloring, what's the best way to find and figure that out as they develop, right?
Because it takes a while. I like sometimes you can have animals that will show like I honestly I would say I think a lot of them show the same sort of like orangish pinkish red color for the first 10 grams, and then after that it may go pink or it may turn sort of purple or it may turn sort of red. So it's not like sort of similar to white like we were talking about. If I breed 2 red geckos, all the offspring are not going to be red. So it's like Chahoua usually color up the most, I would say around 20, 25, 30, 35 grams. And at that point, you can get a pretty good feel for what you're getting. But like, so it kind of depends.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. Yeah. What are some long-term goals for you? I know you want to continue to develop, this dark base and kind of find different variations of the whites, right? What does it look like for you 5 years, 10 years?
It's a good question. I think there's a couple different ways that I think about it. I think the first one would be like, like you're talking about like more super high white, or we've got like stripes, or we have dark base and we figured it out. I think the other way that I think about it is there's just more awareness and people are taking better care of them. Like the number of messages that I get from people and like emails, people who have like Chahoua that have like metabolic bone disease and underbites and like they're dehydrated or females are dying and things like that. Like there's still a long way to go for people to take great care of the Chahoua that they have. And I hope that I can like be a resource and help people who have questions, because there's not as much information out there. It's not as easy to read as it is with crested geckos.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So
well, there's huge opportunity. I mean, I would tell you or Brian or Gilpins or anybody, like you guys have the opportunity to really, I guess, document and share as much as you can with people. So I think that would even help your hobby,
I think
Your
that's
species.
that's probably really where I got started with Chahoua. AJ, you may know this story, but like years ago, like 2009, 2010, when I first had Chahoua, is when people were just feeding them crested gecko diet and said that you just kept them like crested geckos, like they didn't need bugs, anything like that.
Yeah.
And I'd had enough other reptiles before Chahoua that I was realizing that like that was not really true. They weren't eating crested gecko diet. A lot of the animals I had were looking like thin and lethargic, and like if I fed crested gecko diet, they might eat like a lick or two. But then like, you know, I'd get crazy and feed them crickets and they'd go off the wall and eat all of them and look healthier. And so, again, this was like 2009, 2010, but like, honestly, like I took a lot of heat from people during that time because I was one of the first
So
people saying
crazy.
like they need to eat bugs.
Don't feed bugs.
Yeah, and like that was also like AJ, I'm sure you remember this, but that was the age when people were saying starve them out. Remember that? Like people were like, yeah, like starve them out.
Which is so crazy. I mean, if you've ever, and I've had a short stint where I worked with Chahoua, but like when you get a baby Chahoua and you offer it insects, you realize the first time you feed them insects,
that's it.
They're supposed to eat these.
They love it
because they turn into a different. Same with crested geckos, man. I am fully convinced crested geckos are probably more like Chahoua than they are what people think they are. Crested geckos are supposed to eat insects. A lot of them, and that's unpopular opinion. I know everybody wants to, when they're at a reptile show, say, "Oh yeah, you know, it's a great gecko. You don't even have to feed it bugs."
Exactly. Yeah.
That's not true.
That's how I was introduced.
I'm sorry, everyone. I will never tell you at a show you don't need to feed it bugs. I won't say that.
Same. So, I think like, and I only built my website I think 2 years ago. So, my website's still a work in progress, but talking about a lot of those things like nutrition and like PI versus, you know, mainland and, you know, incubating eggs. Like there's a lot of information out there that people still need. So
that animal's so awesome too.
Oh, thanks. There's a lot of information out there that people still need. And, I hope to be able to just help people take better care of the species, because I think that's the best part.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, well, you're doing a good job, man. So thank you for all you're doing.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you just a couple quick questions. Community engagement. Would you say in Chahoua there is a good community as far as collaboration between breeders, sharing of information, maybe lifting each other up, and supporting one another, just from like recommending each other to customers if maybe you don't have an animal and you know a fellow breeder maybe does? Is there a culture of that? Is that something that could be maybe grown in that?
Or are you guys rivals, like bitter rivals? You, Susan, and ET Geckos.
I actually love Brian and Aaron.
No.
So
totally
no, I think I'll say this. I think as value has increased and there are people paying like $20,000 and $30,000 for one gecko, it has become more competitive. But I think like, for example, I know this, like if like I don't always have animals to sell. Like I've done a better job the last 2 years of spacing them out so that I do. But like I will happily tell someone like, hey, check with Brian. Like, hey, I don't have anything like that. Like check with Aaron from ET Geckos, or like Troy V Meister just posted a bunch of stuff for sale. I don't have anything that you're looking for, so like go check Troy's Geckos. And because I think it's just like, in my experience, I've been doing this long enough that it's like people will appreciate the help and the referral and then come back to you the next time that you do have something that they want. And not to say that they're not going to have a great experience buying from like Andrew or Brian or Aaron. They will, but like I think the thing I've always been focused on is just like helping people and giving like as much customer service as I can. So there's a lot of people who, when they first get into Chahoua, reach out to me and ask for help, or, you know, how do I do this or how do I do that? And I'm always willing to help people. And I think I've known Brian long enough and Aaron long enough and Troy long enough. Like, I think we all like have a pretty good, relationship. I think it's just tough where they're like, have you ever tried to find information on breeding Chahoua?
I know there pretty much is none.
Yeah.
We just text you guys.
So yeah. So
which is, I mean, and I don't know if you're gonna be happy about it, but that's why I wanted to ask you a lot of questions, because I feel like access to information is only gonna grow the hobby of Chahoua.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Because if there's not all this smoke and mirror of like, how the heck do I breed these things? People actually feel confident to buy them, right?
Yeah, I think so too.
So
exactly right. Yeah,
I agree. And I think the other, like, you hit it on the head, but like the other cool thing is, I think there are certain people who've been working with the species for like long enough. Like there's probably a core group of people, like I would say Brian and Troy and Andrew and Aaron and probably me, who like make it a point to take good pictures and take video and share information. And so the upside of what's possible with Chahoua, I think, is up to all of us. And I think when I look at those people, I think we've all done a pretty good job of raising awareness and like creating, you know, like new colors and new stripes, whatever else you want to call it. But like, as much as we all can continue to do that, will only help the species grow in popularity. But I agree with you. Like the flip side of it has to be like how are we equipping people to take care of them, to breed them, to enjoy them? So
have you found a lot of uptick in like smaller breeders buying your stuff and growing the hobby as well? Has that been growing significantly throughout
I think so. Okay. I mean, like, I will readily admit this. Like, if I wasn't doing this, whatever it is, 15 years ago or however long I've had him now, there's no way I could afford to get into Chahoua right now.
Yeah.
Like, if I wasn't doing this in 2009, I could not afford to be doing it right now.
Yeah.
And so I think that, unfortunately, like, there was sort of this gap where it's like, if you were one of the people who was on the train before it left the station, like, you're in a good position now. But I mean, like most of the animals I sell are probably to one-off people who are getting their first or getting their second or getting a male for their female. But like, to be able to build a collection of like 30 or 40, 50 like breeding pairs at this point is like wild. Like it's you'd have to be independently wealthy to do that. Like, is that something in the market that you think would, if it shifted, would actually lead to a healthier market if they were more accessible? So maybe. I mean, I guess like the way I think about it too is right now a lot of the focus is on super high white, but I will tell you, since the very beginning, my favorite animals that I have or have bred are the super high colors, like Harry, the one you're getting. Like that is literally my favorite thing I produce. Like when you hold an animal in your hand that looks like it's like fucking plugged into an outlet, that's cool. Like, and so I in a sense, I think that the race for high white and super high white has sort of been kind of like, I think it hasn't really done the species a lot of favors because
toxic.
Because everybody's sort of not paying any attention to anything else, and there's so many different cool like the orange and like the yellow and the red and like that, like super high contrast, like that's a cool looking animal. Like I can tell you, pull it out, like put it in your hand, show your friends, whatever, like it's a really cool animal. So my hope, I think, is that as time goes on, sort of people, and that's also like, it's also much more affordable. Like that's a $500 or $600 gecko versus like, you know, the $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 gecko.
Yeah, I'm convinced. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do the high colors for you.
Yeah,
we'll spearhead that community.
Yeah, you'll enjoy it, I promise. So
it's good advice.
See.
Yeah. So as far as events, are you doing any shows? I mean, it doesn't seem like you really need to. Seems like you're doing pretty good online. Is that something that even from a social standpoint you have interest in the future?
Yeah, I actually love, I usually go to the Atlanta show. I went to Daytona years ago. It's usually like, I guess you're right, honestly, AJ. I usually sell everything I list like within 24 hours, or it doesn't even make it to my website. So in that sense, like for me to go through shipping animals to Tinley and like having someone to pick them up and like open them, make sure they're all alive, and then like I have a setup and I drive to Tinley and I go to the show, like, not to say it's not fun, but it's like not something. It's also like not something I necessarily have to do, which is nice
to make sales.
Yeah. So,
How are we gonna see you to hang out?
yeah, where are we gonna hang out?
We're gonna hang out.
I don't come to Atlanta.
I don't even put my
over.
face on my Instagram, so this is like, but no, I mean, like it's definitely like being able to go to shows and like, for example, like when you and Gabby were here, like it was great to meet you guys, and I was texting Brian like, we're finally gonna meet, and he's like, no, we're not, sorry. So that part of it certainly is fun, and like I do miss out on that part of it. Like I think one of these years I'll definitely go to Tinley.
Let's go to Florfana. A couple months, we'll see you there.
Yeah, I wish. We have a wedding that weekend. But actually, like a couple years ago, Phil Tremper called me and he's like, hey, I'm about to have a layover in the Atlanta airport. You want to hang out? And I was like, yeah. And I like went to the airport and hung out with Phil and his wife, which was great. So I think like sometimes we have this debate, and it's something I actually enjoy talking about. Like, is social media good or has social media been bad for our hobby? And I think it's been both, like being able to create community and bring people together, like people like me who don't usually make it to shows. Like it's, you know, probably ultimately the way that I was able to get here. So in the community aspect of it, it's definitely been a good thing, I would say.
That's awesome. Yeah. We'd love to see you out there one day, but we understand that you that you don't need to. So, but it's good. I mean, we're glad to have you and have your face here on the podcast. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I guess we'll ask you the thing that we ask everybody. I know we've talked about it here kind of in general a bunch, but tips for new breeders for Chahoua.
Yeah.
If you were going to maybe boil down just a couple main tips, what would you say to people, maybe the most common mistakes people make with care or with collecting their first animals? Maybe just a couple takeaways for people.
It's a good, this is something I talk to a lot of people about. And I think there are a lot of people who have a tendency to buy an animal that they don't love or they don't even really like just because they want to get their first one. And so usually that ends up being like an animal that's brown or green or maybe has an underbite or something like that. And 9 times out of 10, I can tell you that when you get your first Chahoua, you're going to want more. And so
true, that's fact.
What I recommend is, like, first thing I would say is kind of like we were talking about breeding, buy what you like. Like if the market is going towards high white and everything else, like that's one thing. If you can afford it, but like buy what you like because it's what you're always going to have the most fun breeding. And so if somebody's at a show willing to sell you like, you know, no lineage, mixed locale Chahoua that's brown for $300, or you really want to buy one from someone else that's like $500, it's bright red and comes from good lineage, save $200 and do that. Like you will be much happier in the long term. The other thing I would say is feed a lot of bugs. It's probably, I think the single most important factor in how you will raise and breed healthy Chahoua is feeding a lot of dusted crickets. And I think the last one would just be pay close attention to your animals. And that's like a given. It's, you know, like for people like us who've been doing it a while, it's a no-brainer. But I talk to a lot of people who approach me and are like, you know, have a female that's calcium crash and is like too far gone, or it hasn't been eating and they haven't been paying attention to it. Like, these are beautiful animals and they're hardy, but they're also somewhat delicate animals in some ways. And pairing and nutrition and breeding are things that can take a toll on them. And so any good keeper should be paying attention to how their animals are doing and looking and eating. And that will only pay you a lot of upside as a keeper long term.
That's awesome advice. That's really good. So I think that brings us to the end of our time. Thank you, Michael, for doing this. It was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
You're very informative for me. I mean,
I have so many more questions. I could keep going.
I know. You can ask him after, Harry. At some point, I gotta go to sleep.
Land the plane.
So we'll land the plane. So guys, make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Make sure to go over to Michael's page, Chahoua Chamber, on Instagram. It looks like he's got a killer website. Chamber. Yeah, Chahoua Chamber. Check out his website too. and make sure that you watch all things that Michael is doing. So yeah, like and subscribe the YouTube, and follow us on Instagram too for more information. And feel free put comments in the YouTube comments if you have questions for Michael. I'm sure that he would be willing to respond to a few comments on there. So if you have questions, make sure to throw them out there. Harry, you got anything else for us?
We're good. I'll link everything in the description. I'll put a little tag at the end as we kind of clip these videos, and we'll post it out tomorrow. By the time you watch this, it'll be tomorrow's
Awesome.
tomorrow morning, Friday morning. So
yeah, this was a lot of fun. So thank you guys for having me. It was a great chat.
Dude,
and Harry, we can chat about Chahoua, and AJ will chat about Saras.
Yeah, I want to talk about Chahoua too. Come on.
All right.
We need to get AJ back into the Chahoua. So
yeah,
doesn't have any.
Now with all these white animals, I can do those. I just can't do the pinks and greens.
AJ's colorblind.
Too colorblind. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. I had a good chunk of Chahoua, but I started hatching out babies, and I remember I showed Brian some of them, and I'm like, oh yeah, I think this one's the nicest, and that one's the ugliest. He's like, you've got them all wrong. I'm like, oh crap, I'm probably gonna have to sell all these things. There's no way I'll be able to actually ever work successfully with these. So but now that there's white ones, I can do that.
It's perfect. Yeah.
Cool. All right, guys. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you, brother. And AJ,
take care.
Always good chatting with you.
Yeah. Thanks, Harry.
Chat after. See you guys. Bye.